from different places, many places. I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I started my family in Cleveland, Ohio. I spent an incredible 7 years in what many of us refer to as the promised land of Ann Arbor, Michigan. But really, I'm most proud of the work that I have done, and especially the friends that I have made and the community that I've become a part of over the past 2 decades here in South Florida. And that pride is rooted in the ideals and the priorities that bring us together this morning. Our commitment to climate leadership in Southeast Florida is deep, and we are acting with urgency. Many throughout the country are rightfully worried about climate change. They might sit back and wonder how it will affect their communities one day, way out there in the future. But we need not wait, and in fact, in South Florida, we cannot wait. Climate change is already here for Floridians. The effects have hit Florida first. That's why our work here is so important. Scientists have warned of warming average global temperatures and a changing climate for decades. Just this past Tuesday, the Arctic Research Program for NOAA released a report produced by 85 scientists which found that the decline of Arctic sea ice caused by surface warming is unprecedented in the past 1,500 years, and that the increasing surface temperatures are unprecedented in the past 2,000 years. This melting ice is the leading contributor to rising sea levels, which we are seeing before our eyes right here in our neighborhoods in South Florida. We see the rate of sea level rise outpace the global rate tenfold. We see the high water mark jump 1 inch every year. We see the tides flooding our neighborhoods. The limestone that serves as the foundation of our state is porous. Salt water pushes up through the limestone from below the surface. Lower bridge heights will block boats from reaching open waters. And with 165 miles of beautiful canals, Fort Lauderdale faces particularly significant threats of sea level rise. And who here in this room who's from South Florida hasn't driven around your neighborhood and noticed more puddles and water accumulating on sidewalks and streets, even on sunny days? While many Americans might be able to ignore climate change science based on their own personal experiences, we cannot. We can't put climate change out of sight. We can't put it out of mind. And therefore, we must, and by we, I mean clear-headed Democrats, Republicans, and independents, we must effectively communicate our observations and experiences in Florida to those with less direct exposure. We must promote the evidence-based views of the scientific community and not repeat the illogical ramblings of climate deniers. Unless Americans recognize and understand what we face, unless we build consensus, we cannot possibly overcome the immense challenges that we face. This conference offers an opportunity for leaders in Broward, Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Monroe counties to share their successes and a plan for the future, and to plan for the future at the forefront of climate solutions. I came here today to applaud your work and to ask for your continued partnership toward inspiring other regions across the country to join us. I also wanted to share with you some of my work in Congress to advance bipartisan solutions to these challenges. I believe that leaders in South Florida can and should be the catalyst to spark the climate change debate in Washington. Reports have predicted that on our current path, by the year 2100, almost 300 cities would lose at least half of their homes. 36 U.S. cities would be completely destroyed. Now, those same models estimate that 1 in 8 Florida homes would be underwater. Those Florida homes represent half of the total expected loss in housing value caused by climate change over the next 8 decades. Now, these aren't risks of a distant future. These are the burdens that we are placing on our children and our grandchildren right now if we don't act. In response, and through the work of the Climate Compact, Miami Beach has initiated a sea level rise plan at a cost of $500 million to lift roads, build up seawalls, and install pumps to clear water that runs in the streets. Fort Lauderdale is fixing roads and drains, sending vacuum trucks into the streets to prevent saltwater damage, and is upgrading building codes, flood elevation requirements for yards, and requiring higher seawalls. And we're seeing similar actions at the county level and in other communities all throughout South Florida. And these are important initiatives, and they deserve support from federal infrastructure investment and grants that will help cities and counties further prepare for the most immediate impacts. When we go back to Washington in January and the conversation shifts to infrastructure, it will be up to everyone in this room to ensure that that infrastructure discussion necessarily include a discussion of climate change infrastructure. But we also need to address our continued reliance on, we need to look to address our continued reliance on fossil fuels, because that undermines so much of the work that we do to protect our vulnerable communities. Unfortunately, in May of this year, the President decided to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement. This two-year-old agreement is moving the world community toward a goal of limiting global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a half degree less than the previous target. With Syria recently signing on to the agreement, the United States is now the only country in the world that is not a part of the Paris Agreement. But here's the good news. The void left by the President and his administration to decrease carbon emissions is being filled. It's being filled by state and local government leaders. It's being filled by leaders in the business community. It is, quite frankly, being filled by people just like all of us in this room. We know that carbon is not a part of our long-term future. Developing and scaling up clean, renewable energy technology, that's what the future is. And the evidence is available right now in South Florida. That's why it is my mission to use what we have learned here as much as I can to drive the climate debate in Washington. In 2016, I founded the Climate Solutions Caucus, a bipartisan caucus with my friend Carlos, a fellow South Florida congressman. Our goal from the start was to bring together members from diverse regions around the country who are experiencing their own climate change challenges. Unless Plains States members who worry about floods and droughts talk to East Coast members who worry about sea level rise and hurricane intensity, we won't make any progress. These important exchanges begin the slow process of creating federal policy that will make it possible to rise to the challenges posed by climate change. Our bipartisan caucus has a difficult task. I acknowledge that. Polarization and brinksmanship has made compromise in Washington hard to find. And historically, climate change policy has been mired by partisanship and by division. Senators have delivered speeches with snowballs in hand as evidence that climate change is a hoax. From 2007 to 2011, a third of the members of the United States House and a quarter of the United States Senate signed a pledge that effectively blocked any meaningful action on climate change in Congress. President Trump and his administration have been focused on rolling back and repealing former President Obama's efforts to curb carbon emissions and confront the challenges of climate change. Here in Florida, as we know, the governor imposed an unwritten rule discouraging the use of the term climate change in official publications and statements. A order like that makes it awfully hard to have the important conversations that, however, have too much at stake to continue these political games. Florida coastal real estate is still some of the most sought after in the country, and in spite of the risk, an estimated 11,000 condominium units are under construction in more than 100 buildings in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. Our tourism industries are the backbone of our economy. Port Everglades has set a single-day record with over 54,000 cruise passengers passing through Fort Lauderdale. In total, tourism and hospitality-related industries produce a $90 billion economic impact in our state, $24 billion in Miami-Dade County alone. But without action on climate change, catastrophic losses aren't just possible. Catastrophic losses are a certainty. And while some areas of our country are insulated from the most obvious evidence of climate change, that is not the case here. We are dealing with the reality of climate change every day. That is why the work of the Regional Climate Compact is more important than ever to share with the rest of the country. Without cooperation in Washington, the burden will continue to fall on local government and private sector leaders, all of you in this room. And without a commitment to shift toward renewable fuels, the task that you face will be immeasurably more difficult than it already is. The hard work and achievement of the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact offers what is beyond a doubt an inspiring model that deserves replication all across the country. I believe that your work, that the work that you're doing right here, that we're all doing right here in South Florida, can inspire Washington to invest in energy and infrastructure that will amplify that hard work, rather than pushing back against it. Through the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus, we are bringing together 62 members of Congress, evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. We're bringing them to the table to discuss climate change issues, how they impact our country, and possible ways to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And we are working hard to bring our colleagues examples of private industries that are thinking toward the future. And before I finish, I just want to give you some of those examples so you understand the conversation that's taking place. At our first meeting, we invited Statoil, a top 30 global oil producer, to discuss its plans to embrace renewable energy and new technologies. We also met with former Admiral Neil Morsetti of the British Navy, who spoke of the rising instability caused by drought, water shortages, and crop destruction globally. His concerns have been exemplified by the extreme drought that drove up food prices, spread disease, and forced 1.5 million rural residents of Syria to flood the urban areas, tipping the country toward a civil war that has claimed over 500,000 lives so far. We met with a member of the New Zealand Parliament to discuss the Paris Climate Agreement, which I mentioned earlier, that set a new goal of reducing carbon emissions. The caucus met with Solar City. We met with Duke Energy to discuss the importance of long-term extensions of the solar investment tax credit, upgrading our 100-year-old power grid to prepare for scaled-up renewable energy production. And we even met with Olympic athletes and recreational businesses on the impact that warmer winters are having and historic wildfires are having on the outdoor sports industry. We've steadily expanded the membership of the caucus. We now include serious legislators who are responding to the climate change needs in their own communities, from shorter winters cutting into tourist seasons in the Northeast, scarce water supply in California, reducing agricultural output, naval bases in Virginia that will be underwater by the end of the century if we don't act, and the unpredictable impact of insurance risk, the rippling impact of severe weather events across our country. My colleagues in Congress need to see these striking impacts firsthand. They need to know what we're facing, and they need to realize that it's already happening around the country and around the world, even if they're not seeing it in their districts yet. We're going to need the leaders and the expertise of those of us in South Florida, leaders like you, leaders from around the country and around the world, and I look forward to bringing your perspectives and to the debate that we are starting in Congress. The Climate Solutions Caucus will need your help to prove that whatever divisions exist in Washington, and there are a few, we will be able to bring leaders together to ensure a stronger, more sustainable infrastructure, economy, and climate for our future. The enormity of the challenge, the grave risks to our planet, the suffocating partisanship in our politics make it easy to let cynicism creep in. Really easy to become cynical. But I want to leave you, I hope, with a bit of inspiration. 62 members of the Climate Solutions Caucus might not sound like much. Cynics say that it's just a way for Republicans to relieve political pressure back home. But 62 bipartisan members is enough to change the outcome of votes that are often split along party lines. Just this week, President Trump signed the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, without the Climate Solutions Caucus, there would have been an amendment in that annual defense bill. It would have prohibited our military from studying the risks to our national security posed by climate change. That amendment would have taken climate change out of that bill altogether. But when the amendment came to a floor vote, every Democrat on the Climate Solutions Caucus and all but one Republican on the Climate Solutions Caucus voted no. And we carried the day. And this is the progress that we'll be building on. This is the seed of change that will put evidence above rhetoric. This is the only way that we will ever be able to have the difficult conversations necessary to break through our partisan divisions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the start of winning the debate. This is how we win the battle against climate change. So I want to thank you for your leadership in South Florida. I want to thank the national leaders who have come from across the country to support our efforts here. I welcome your partnership in Washington, and I am grateful and excited that the work that we do together will better our community, it will better our nation, and it will better our world. Thank you so much for what you do, and thank you so much for inviting me to spend some time with you this morning.
Well, thank you, Congressman Deutsch. What an incredible speech and incredible efforts in building bipartisan support on these issues of climate change, energy, sea level rise, adaptation, infrastructure. And just on a personal note, it's just amazing the local presence that you so regularly have. You're just incredibly accessible, hosting Senate field hearings, meeting with the business community, academic partners, local government. I don't know how you get it all done, but you're an incredible advocate, great communicator, and so informed, and we really appreciate that you're here for us. Thank you. So we will now be transitioning to our next panel discussion that is focused on on-the-ground efforts and local implementation of a lot of the energy and climate adaptation activities that are happening here. Within the compact region, this conversation will be supported by members of our staff steering committee, celebrating individual successes and as a collective accumulation of advancements for our region. And again, moderating this discussion is Mr. Steve Adams, Director of Urban Resilience for the Institute of Sustainable Communities. Thank you. Table, because we're missing Senator Keller.
Hi, good morning. We've spent the morning hearing about some innovations from across the country, and gracious as we are, we now have the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the work that's being done here in Southeast Florida. There, I think, is ample evidence from this morning's conversations, both from King County and then from our regional panelists from New York, New Orleans, Los Angeles, and other locations, Boston. There's a lot we can learn, and we're very keen in doing that. I want to kind of start the humble brag, if I may, just by showing enormous appreciation to Representative Deutsch's remarks just now, and just that evidence of the bipartisanship. And we take huge pride in the fact that two of our members here from this region were, in fact, the two that came together to form that caucus, now 60 strong in the House. That is awesome. So joining me now are four friends that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. John Van Arnhem, of course, is the Deputy County Administrator from Palm Beach County. Rhonda Haig is a Sustainability and Projects Director for Monroe County. Jennifer Gerardo, of course, our able MC for this event, is also the CRO in her other life for Broward County, and then Nicole Hefty is the Deputy Resilience Officer for Miami-Dade County. And congruent with the theme of the summit, we're talking about, this is the opportunity to talk about some of the accomplishments. And thanks to Matthew, we didn't get a chance to share some updates with you last year. So this covers work that's happened over the last 2 years across the 4-county region. Much of this work has multiple benefits, and I think any sort of good public policy bears those hallmarks, that you know you're on to right public policy when you are taking care of multiple public objectives. And protecting regional commerce is a co-equal value with protecting environmental amenities, protecting the integrity of neighborhoods, and protecting equitable outcomes as well. And I think each of our panelists will be able to share a little bit of the work they've been doing in that regard, and how their work is actually building those efforts. So John, you're first up on the docket. What's going on in Palm Beach County?
Well, thank you, Steve. Again, my name's John Van Arnhem. People say I look a little bit like Congressman Deutsch. I don't know how he'd feel about that, but I took it as a compliment. So great presentation by the Congressman. Before I talk about what we're doing in Palm Beach County, I wanted to just step back a minute and talk about steps to resilience. Not steps as you would find in a set of instructions. For example, if you went to IKEA and bought one of those nice pieces of furniture that looks so good in the showroom, and then you get it home in a box, and you know, you're 3 hours later, you're on step 23, and the thing still is not quite right. But steps in a stairway or steps along a pathway are a pathway to resilience. Our activities and projects contributing to resilience, our implementation of recommendations of the Regional Climate Action Plan, are steps towards leading us to the resilient communities that we've talked about so much in the last day and this morning. For each city and county, the steps are going to be different, however. For each region of the county, the steps are also going to be different. You know, we heard from King County and New Orleans and Boston, California, about what they're doing and some of the very significant projects that are happening around the country. And in this panel, you'll hear about some of the projects here in Southeast Florida, and you've also heard some of that in some of the earlier panels. And you've also heard the message of think big, and you know, I'm all for that think big, but I also think we need to remember we also need to think small sometimes. We have small cities, we have small counties that also need to be thinking about resilience and climate change, and part of what we're trying to do in the compact is to make sure that when we look at resilience for our region, that we are developing tools and relationships and so on, and the relationships outside of our region that are going to help all of those entities move along towards this path towards resilience. Our counties aren't the same. No two cities are the same. Our needs are going to differ, and our choice of steps are going to differ, and the decision-making that we do to decide what steps are appropriate for our communities, what we can afford, and what order we're going to do them in is different. So you'll hear, and I think that's one of the exciting things about what we're working on, is you'll hear a lot of different approaches, and this summit and others like it are great opportunities to learn from others. All of this, though, we all face the same threats from sea level rise, from more frequent and severe tropical storms and hurricanes, and probably at some time or another from periods of extreme drought. We know we have flooding from rainfall events, and we'll likely have the drought periods, and and unfortunately have to face the threat of wildfires like we know our friends in Los Angeles, and we are thinking about our friends in California as they face that threat. Well, we all have to protect our communities, our governments, and our services and our businesses. How we build resilience, though, into these systems is going to vary from city to city, county to county, and neighborhood to neighborhood. The important thing is that we start, we build a foundation, and that we grow and we build on that foundation moving forward. Our steps are going to look different, our paths are going to vary, but our mission is going to stay the same, and our focus on preparing for the future needs to stay in place. So I just have a couple of slides that I'm going to highlight what we're doing in Palm Beach County, and I'm going to move through this relatively quickly so we can pick up a little bit of time. Part of that foundation in Palm Beach County was in the last year we created an Office of Resilience. We had a climate change and sustainability coordinator position, and I think it was one of the, at least the media reported that it was one of, if not the first, government position at least in Florida and South Florida to have the word climate change in the title of the position. So we were proud of that. We've moved on, and as you've heard from other communities, we've created an Office of Resilience and a Chief Resilience Officer position, which will help make sure that program grows and stays in place in the future. It'll be harder for somebody to take it away, and it will help us add staff and create the structure that seems to be working well in other communities. And the next thing I wanted to mention, SoulSmart, is a program that we've participated in to help facilitate, streamline our permitting of solar projects and the inspection process. So we're excited about that. We're making some good progress. We'll be adjusting our permitting criteria and so on to make it easier to permit solar in Palm Beach County. We have the PACE program. You've heard quite a bit about that, I think, yesterday. I won't go into too much of that. That's the Property Assessed Clean Energy program. It's quite a bit of work for us to get that going. We have 4 agreements now with PACE agencies and PACE providers so that our citizens in Palm Beach County can take advantage of alternatives to conventional financing for projects that might include things like replacing windows, roofs, adding solar. Importantly, we've added provisions to our comprehensive plan to set the framework for activities within the county and to move land development regulations and others towards climate to address climate change. We do use those words in our comprehensive plan. Also, infrastructure. We've talked a lot about how to the efforts to harden infrastructure. You'll see some of the presentations on that. We've created policies that require that we consider climate change and resilience in the renewal and replacement policies, renewal and replacement projects that we're working on, and we have a number of them that are coming up in the next 10 years under a new sales tax, a penny sales tax for infrastructure that we were able to pass, and you probably heard our administrator talk about that yesterday. We also have a lot of energy-related activities, programs to try to reduce energy consumption, move towards renewables. We have a very aggressive project on signal timing. We're working hard in our utilities department to diversify our sources of water, but also to reduce our energy consumption at our facilities. On the environmental front, we have created 15 plus miles of living shorelines, an important strategy, something that you can read more about in the Regional Climate Action Plan. We're spending literally millions of dollars right now to retrofit sports field lighting, a big user of energy to get more energy efficient LEDs lighting in our facilities. Hybrid buses, adding hybrids to our fleet. We're looking at adding electric under a pilot program if we're able to take advantage of some funding from the VW settlement, possibly. And in the flood area, we have a lot going on with we did a lot of work on making sure that our remapping of our flood zone maps, working with FEMA, that we had accurate data that was going into the maps that were used for Palm Beach County. The community rating system, we have a local mitigation strategy. We have a post-disaster redevelopment program that's important that incorporates resilient concepts into that recovery plan. I didn't want to leave without mentioning our municipalities also are making a lot of great strides, and on the slide you can see a couple of the highlights from municipal programs that are also some of the county programs. They are working in adaptation action areas, working on a lot of stormwater retrofits, and very aggressively working in some mitigation areas. So we're proud of the work that we've been doing in Palm Beach County and also the work that our cities have been doing, and we just want to continue that and try to work with more cities so that we can see more projects on the list for next year.
Okay, thank you, John. Rhonda, moving from Palm Beach County down to the Keys.
Okay.
What's going on in Monroe?
So when I was here 2 years ago, because we didn't have the summit, we talked about, I showed you a lot of our modeling slides and what the anticipated sea level rise inundation would be for the Keys. Of course, the Keys, very low level, spread out over well over 100 miles, many 300 miles of county roads, half of which are going to be subject to sea level rise by 2060. So you're talking 150 miles of county roads. That doesn't include US 1, that's a state road, but of course that's the backbone of the Keys. Also parts of that are susceptible. And you heard here in the last summit 2 years ago, you heard Miami Beach talk about their roads elevation program, which I'm going to talk to you about the Keys, but very different animal. Miami Beach is very compact, a lot of people all there at once, and as you heard them, when they did their road elevation, they elevated it very high all at once. And I'd love to do that, but you're going to see today why that's not going to be an option for the Keys, probably a very different animal that we're looking at today. And I have to stand up because I can't see the thing. Okay, so we're here to talk about sea level rise in the Keys and how it's a little bit different. So Big Pine Key, this is what Big Pine Key looks like today. I'm just trying to help you understand what are we looking at in terms of inundation. Now in 2030, which is less than 15 years away, this is the highest. This is 7 inches, and you can see those red areas. That's where neighborhoods are already, in the roads are already starting to see pretty high levels of inundation. So of course we're going to have to focus our efforts on these low-lying areas like this when we talk about our roads elevation program. And this is Big Pine Key by 2060 with the highest level of projected sea level rise. If that occurs, there's a whole lot of red there. So we really have our work cut out at the county. And we're not going to be able to do this by ourselves. You heard our mayor talk yesterday that we're going to have to look at how we handle our investments in infrastructure. The county, there's only 75,000 people. We have hundreds of miles of shoreline and hundreds of miles of islands. So we're tied at the hip with our state partners and our federal partners. And just like we needed help with our billion-dollar sewer project, we're going to need help with our roads elevation project. And then we had an event, so that was what the projected efforts. Then we had an actual event back in 2015, the October King Tide flooding event. And we had a neighborhood in Key Largo, 16 inches of water for 3 weeks straight. Not happy campers, salt water, it didn't go up and down, it just stayed there on those roads. Our beautiful, that's not a canal there, that's a road. And so that's what they were looking at. And there's our county inspectors there out checking out the canals. It's new, it's the new thing now. Instead of the self-driving, we have the dog-driven vehicles there. And that same thing happened in 2017. The same neighborhood saw the same type of things. And we had similar in Big Pine. So what we decided to do is we haven't elevated roads anywhere yet in Monroe County. I don't know if you know that. So we decided after we got these two, we decided to pick 2 pilot projects. And we picked one in Big Pine Key, much lower elevation in Big Pine Key. Key Largo is definitely quite a bit higher. So two different types of projects. And why we picked these very far apart, we wanted to see, okay, what are we looking at in terms of road elevation in these two areas? And so the purpose was to address the flooding impacts, because we had a lot of angry residents that said, we don't want to be under 16 inches of water for 3 weeks straight, or we're going to sell our houses. So of course we don't want that to happen. We want people to be able to stay here. Second one was to develop cost estimates. Things are always more expensive in the Keys. I don't know why, but they are. And third, it was develop a standard method to evaluate impacts for road improvement projects. So it's like, okay, everybody thinks we want to elevate our roads all at once, like Miami Beach did, to 28 inches, but that costs a lot of money. And maybe we can let our feet get wet a few days a year. So instead of 3 weeks of getting your feet wet, maybe they'll tolerate getting their toes wet for a couple of days. So that's kind of the things that we looked at. And then finally, creating the policies for road improvement projects. So when we do move forward, we're not cherry picking, we're following policies, very standard stuff. And of course, I already said we don't have the money to do it all. We're going to be tied at the hip with our state and federal partners. And so these are the kind of designs we were looking at. So when you're looking at Keys roads right now, it's very different from mainland roads. We don't have any stormwater infrastructure down here, very little. You do see some in Key West. Basically, it's either gravel or blacktop on a road, and that's it. Well, what happens was when you start to get sea level rise, your base starts washing out and your road washes away. And we saw that in Hurricane Irma, where we lost sections of roads. So when we're looking at building future roads and we're elevating them, we have to build the base very, very solid that will withstand that constant in and out of water flow, and that we can add on higher later. So we don't have to build at 28 inches all at once. We can start out with a very strong base and then build on later as we have money and as the seas continue to rise. So that's what we're looking at. And then these are type of local conditions. I'm not going to talk a lot about these, but just so you can see, Keys roads are very skinny. You can't elevate roads without making them wider. So a lot of our skinny back roads now, when we elevate them, are going to have to be wider. Well, when you make them wider, you start taking away right away. You start going into people's backyards and fences, like you heard the mayor talk yesterday. And so that's a whole new set of issues. And it's not only that. Not only do we have to build the roads higher to avoid the sea level rise, but you now have to capture the stormwater as required by law. So you can't just capture it and let it roll back into the ocean or into the bay. You have to capture it and treat it before you release it. So now you're looking at pump stations in people's yards where they never had them before. So lots of different things going on in the Keys. Going to be a little bit different when you come down here in the next couple of decades. These roads are going to change. Okay, and then finally what we did for these two projects, we looked at we picked an average of 7 days of flooding annually. We thought people can get their toes wet maybe about a week a year, and we can get away with that. So that's what we picked for an interim standard. Then we added in the projected sea level rise and the average high water to pick the level of roads that we were going to elevate. So Key Largo, because it's higher, let me just go one more slide. We decided to avoid have only 7 days of flooding. They only needed 5 inches. Big Pine Key, because they're lower down there, we have to elevate 11 inches. 5 inches Key Largo, 11 inches Big Pine. This is just a quick showing. We don't elevate the whole section of road. Roads go up and down, so you elevate only the most necessary parts. That's the Key Largo neighborhood there, of course, right next to the bay. And then Big Pine, a little more spread out. And the red parts are the parts that we're going to elevate. We couldn't afford to do the whole thing. If we could, we'd do it all. But in the next slide, you're going to understand why. It's expensive. So when we're talking Twin Lakes, when you look in 6 inches, it's 0.92 million, or you can go all the way down to 28 inches height. That's $7 million for a mile. Remember, we have 300 miles of county roads, 150 subject to sea level rise. Big Pine, same thing. We look at 0.3 miles for 2.2. That's a very short distance. If you're going to elevate it higher and longer, now you're looking at 10 million. So very expensive. So we chose, I'll show you right here, we chose the 6-inch elevation for Key Largo. That made the most sense. It got the worst of the worst out of the way. Didn't resolve the whole problem, but it will be okay for the next 15 years. And in Big Pine, we had to go higher. We had to go 1/3 of a mile. We didn't go the whole 1.5 miles, though, so you can see there, about $4 million with engineering. So those are the options we picked. But you can see, when you go down to 28 inches, when we start building up in the future, you're looking at, in today's dollars, like $10 million a mile. Very, very expensive. For the Keys, remember, we're only 75,000 residents. That's less than many of your cities in the other counties. Of course, we had to show the key deer. And some of the things I already talked about, site constraints, really skinny roads, especially like in the lower Keys area. And if you have to make them higher, you're going to have to start taking yards away. Well, they don't even have much yards down there, and they use the right-of-way for parking. So we have some really big issues we're looking at. We have water quality requirements. I said we have to capture it and treat it, right-of-way needs, availability of land to accommodate drainage, all these things, just like every other road elevation project. It's just more concentrated in the Keys because we're so limited by our space already. And I always have to end my presentation with beautiful pictures of the fabulous Florida Keys. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Rhonda, so much. All right. Okay, so next up is the home team. Jennifer.
All right. Well, I lament that I don't have such attractive photos in my presentation, but it'll be pretty brief. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the key initiatives that we've seen advance in Broward County in the last year. One focuses on the implementation of PACE. Again, we've heard about PACE over the last several days, but I just wanted to share, while it might be embarrassing, you know, we recognize that 50% of the overall emissions in our county are associated with commercial and residential energy use. And we had recognized that maybe we don't have all the same tools that communities have across the country in trying to advance energy efficiency and renewable energy programs. And so we recognized that much of what needed to take place would need to focus on existing building stock. And for a period of several years, in fact, it was a 5-year effort if we want to be honest with ourselves, we evaluated a number of the options that would be available to help accelerate investments by existing property owners. And a lot of this was focused on PACE once we saw PACE legislation adopted within the state. And then it was a complex thing for us to review, extensive contracts and thinking about consumer protections and coordination with the municipalities. But after a very intense and focused effort, we were thrilled to be able to celebrate the launching of a community-wide PACE program in June of 2016. And I think we've had a couple of cities that have opted out. Some of the cities have continued to implement municipal level programs with maybe 1 or 2 providers, but what we were able to deliver for any community that did not opt out, and that was important because our unincorporated area is quite small, and we have 31 cities in Broward County, we wanted to be able to offer all the residents a whole suite of opportunities through a collection of PACE providers. And of course, all of those PACE providers have contractors who work for them. We wanted to be able to provide strong, again, consumer protection assurances, making sure that we wouldn't find people overextended with projects that they couldn't afford and that there'd be a high level of transparency, et cetera. So we did work through that process with our PACE providers, and once rolled out, we saw that the program was wildly popular. We had one more PACE provider that came into one of the districts most recently. So I think we have four or five PACE providers in the county today. You can see the diversity of and number of projects. We have strong interest, of course, in the energy conservation and renewable energy projects. Upon initial launching, we saw just 1% of the total projects included renewable energy. But in the last 2 quarters, we've seen the number increase from 2% to 5%. In my own neighborhood, I can see the evidence. I see more solar in my small neighborhood. I don't know for sure, but my estimation is that those are PACE-funded projects. Seen a lot of wind resistance improvements being advanced, and I was given permission to acknowledge that our own mayor, Mayor Beamfer, used PACE in his home to advance energy efficiency improvements. So, it's a program that's really working well. We have, as you can see, over $60 million in projects that have been financed within the county in the last year and a half. I think we need to translate these numbers to jobs and talk more about how PACE is helping with economic development. But clearly, this is activity and people who are employed doing work that didn't exist in our county just a couple of years ago. So we're really thrilled. It's worked very well for us, and our PACE providers have been highly responsive to the requests that we've made as a community to try and address any issues that come up along the way. So that's one area of advancement. The other is focused more on adaptation. I wanted to share that our commission took a very bold step forward during this last year in trying to set the stage for resilient standards as part of our development process, whether that's drainage or thinking about finished floor elevations. So one of the things that they did was adopt formally what is a future conditions map series that is part of the Broward County Code of Ordinances. And in that process, they also adopted the first map in the series, which is an update to our groundwater elevation map for wet season. That is important because you'll see in the next slide, we know that sea level rise not only results in superficial flooding, but it's also affecting groundwater elevations, which reduces the amount of storage that we have in the soils for rain when it rains, and that influences the overall function as well of our drainage infrastructure, whether that's French drains or retention ponds or drainage wells. And so when we know that groundwater elevation has already risen a foot in our county in the last 20 to 50 years, depending which well you look at, and we know that it's going to continue to rise. So as we continue to allow for development and drainage infrastructure investments in the region, we want to make sure that those are investments that are going to function for the duration of that infrastructure, and we're focusing on a 40 to 50-year time frame. So I'll show in the next slide some of those details, but so as I said, the board formally moved forward with a new map for wet season groundwater elevations. It took effect on July 1st, and it is now the standard that's applied to all new development and major redevelopment in our county. I want to celebrate that we were able to do that without any challenge in that process. We work very closely with the consulting community, the development community, to talk about how we arrived at the new map, the assumptions that were taken into account. We had great staff that were working on that, and as a result, that was a significant milestone. I want to share at the same time that we have a couple of other efforts that are underway. One includes working with the Army Corps of Engineers and conducting hydrologic modeling that accounts for 2 feet of sea level rise coupled with high-frequency storm events coupled with high tide. And we're utilizing that modeling to come forward with a recommended seawall top elevation that would help guide investments across our county, because we know that in the interim, while some cities are taking a lead in setting, maybe a standard for project improvements, we don't have a uniform strategy across the cities, nor do we have a uniform timeline where we would want to achieve the collective upgrade of infrastructure. And until we arrive at that point, you'll have one investment that's made, but the very next year it could still flood if it's not coupled with adjacent improvements that provide for uniformity in these flood barriers. So that work, and we're, as I said, working with the Army Corps on that. We have economic numbers that are supporting that through work that RMS is conducting for us. And I just want to share that despite certain criticisms, we have a very strong investment that's been made by the DOT in giving us very high reso LiDAR data to support the detailing of elevations for a large swath of our county. And that's been an important investment resources that our state is providing. And on top of that, our board also moved forward with the selection of a firm that is going to be aiding us in updating our community flood maps. These are quite similar to FEMA flood maps in terms of what they look like, but this map is one of 3 tools that we use for setting finished floor elevations, because not all areas are in a FEMA flood zone, so you have to have other information, data to help set what are appropriate standards. We've used a community flood map to always be ahead of the FEMA standards. So this community flood map has depicted flood conditions under a situation of build-out in our community, where we would assume much more in the way of impervious material and higher flood elevations as development occurs. Well, that's no longer the worst-case scenario, because we are built out in Broward County already, and we also know that during this time of build-out, seas have risen. And those things continue to influence flood elevations. And so we are now prepared to update our 100-year community flood map, which is not used to set insurance rates, but is used to set finished floor elevations or other elevations for critical infrastructure. So Geosyntec was selected to do that work for us, and we anticipate this being a one-year project. And we have 9 municipalities and drainage districts that are offering us cost-share funding in that project. And we will use this exercise to also help achieve additional criteria under the community rating system, which will deliver to our residents additional, for some of the communities where it makes a difference, additional discounts on their flood insurance policies. And it's getting harder to meet the numeric goals for those discounts. So addressing future conditions and setting more rigorous standards is a way in which that program is being ramped up. So with this set of slides, and it is my last one, it's just an example of the groundwater. Well, it's an example of how we take information that we're integrating into our planning processes, such as the uniform adoption across all 4 of our counties for the sea level rise projection that you can see on the left. All 4 of our counties and half of the cities in Broward County have adopted this projection as well for planning purposes. Then we worked with the USGS to model, well, what does that mean in terms of groundwater elevations in the future? So the middle graphic shows where we expect groundwater elevations to rise with about 2.5 feet of an increase in sea level. Well, that's useful, but how do you take a graphic like that and now apply it to a design process? So then we did additional work utilizing another model to model the change in groundwater elevation. The groundwater, the wet season groundwater elevation map is the graph on the graphic on the right. It's an interactive graphic. It's available on our website today. So if you have a project, you click and you can see what the future condition groundwater elevation is. And for those who are interested in knowing, well, how does that compare with the situation today? How much more do I have to do? We've also worked with MIT to develop some really quick tools that show these cross sections, but here is an example of one just developed in-house. The dashed line is the existing groundwater elevation on the map that was not even the existing, it's our historic map. And in that case, I said we've already seen changes. The dark blue line is the modeled change in groundwater elevation with additional sea level rise, and the red line is the land surface. So you can see, and this runs west to east across Broward County, so you can see we don't actually see a significant change in the groundwater elevations too far west. In fact, salinity control structures help to really limit the amount of change. But you can also see that where we have higher groundwater, or excuse me, land surface elevations, there's still a lot of separation between the land surface and the groundwater table. So there's a lot of storage, and that change probably doesn't mean too much. But where land elevations are very low, you can see the interception, essentially, of the groundwater elevation with the land surface. And in those areas, it's going to be much, much more challenging to meet those drainage requirements. But we were able to show that they can be met, and worked with our engineering and licensing group to show case studies and estimated 0.5 to 1.5 increase in project costs to meet the design standards that would satisfy drainage requirements in the 2060 time frame. So those are a couple of highlights from the work that we've done in the region and where we're in Broward County, and where we're moving in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, Nicole Hefty, and she's going to assume the podium.
I don't know, Steve. I don't know if my mic is going to be here. Turn that off.
Would you want to?
Didn't want to have any
Do you
feedback.
want to sit in my chair?
Sure. See how well we work together? Thank you, Jennifer. So I'm going to just highlight 3 of the many projects that we're working on in Miami-Dade County. We were asked to kind of identify projects that we felt were particularly important for economic resilience, and I think that these will be clear. I would encourage you, there's a lot of more detail that I won't be able to get into, but I do encourage you to either visit our booth outside or contact myself or any of the staff in our office, because we have a lot of information we'd like to share. So the first project that I'm going to highlight is our Resilient Cities project. And so in 2015, Miami-Dade County partnered with the City of Miami and the City of Miami Beach to apply for this international program that is powered by the Rockefeller Foundation. And one of the things I really want to emphasize is that we knew going into this, because of the efforts through the compact and the relationships that we had built through the compact, we knew that we could work together as a team going forward in this. And we are the first collaborative that is part of this program. They normally deal with cities individually. So we've kind of broken the mold, and we continue to push the envelope with them. And so I think they're learning from us the tremendous benefits of regional collaboration, and one of my goals is to see how we can expand this to the full 4-county region. So the program really asks us to identify 4 shocks and 4 stresses that we think are primary challenges to our community. So you can see there that several of these are not a surprise, and this is not only climate and sea level rise related, it's really about the full resilience of the entire community. And so as you've heard in former presentations, affordable housing is a critical issue here in South Florida. We do have pronounced poverty in areas, and certainly in Miami-Dade County, we have a public transportation system that we feel really could be much improved and is a challenge because a lot of folks can't get to where they need to get on time because they're sitting in traffic. And we really want to get folks out of their cars and in public transportation. That's really a challenge and a stress to our economic resilience and the quality of life in our community. So the 3 entities, we call ourselves Greater Miami and the Beaches, and our full intention is to engage all municipalities. We have 34 in Miami-Dade County. So although we're working directly with 2, we went through the process in phase 1 of community engagement, and we tried to meet with every single municipal mayor. We were able to tackle that and meet face-to-face with about 70% of the mayors, and we're still continuing to reach out to those we haven't spoken to directly. But also part of this is really an effort to better engage our municipalities in this process. You can see the timeline down there. I won't go into the details, but we're beginning phase 2. We're going to be delving in what we call discovery areas. These are areas such as sea level rise, affordable housing, that we need to understand better what are our 2 challenges. And through that process, we're creating work groups for these discovery areas. We're going to be identifying ways, strategies, initiatives that we'll be able to incorporate into our resilience strategy to address them. And we're anticipating our resilience strategy will be released in January of 2019. So stay tuned for that. Another program I want to highlight, we've just started this program. We call it Building Efficiency 305. And the county has been working for years to improve energy efficiency and water efficiency in our own facilities, and we continue to do that. But we really haven't made a lot of strides in the public sector. And although we have several LEED certified buildings in the private sector, we know we can do better. Energy and water is about 20% of a building's operational costs. So it's a great opportunity for these building owners and the residents to put that money back in their pockets through efficiency. And so we're going to be working with the municipalities and community stakeholders to tackle buildings that are 20,000 square feet or greater. That's about 2% of the buildings in Miami-Dade County, which is about 10,000 buildings, but it comprises 43% of our square footage. So we feel that by tackling that sector initially, that's a great opportunity to really address a large component. And so we'll be looking at how buildings can benchmark, and we know that that increases their competitiveness and also provides the data they need to identify the opportunities for increasing energy and water efficiency. So specifically with regards to business resilience or economic resilience, it's going to reduce the percentage of income spent on utility bills, which is going to increase the profit, and then also increase the asset value. We know that folks these days and businesses are looking to be in buildings that are more energy and water efficient, not only because of the cost, but because that's the right thing to do. It's good for their promotion as well, and so we really want to be a leader in that respect. In addition, it's also going to be creating jobs at various skill levels. So we think this is we're really looking forward to implementing this program in the next 2 years, actually about a year and a half now. The final program I want to highlight is what we call our Rapid Action Plan. And we've spent the last year assessing vulnerability of critical infrastructure in Miami-Dade County. And what I want to say is that our Water and Sewer Department took the lead on this several years ago. And they looked at their critical facilities because they were embarking on a $13+ billion bond program to repair and improve the water and sewer infrastructure throughout the county. And so knowing that we had a compact unified sea level rise projection, they utilized that. So once again, another tool that the compact has been able to provide to our community. And they modeled storm surge and really looked at the criticality and vulnerability of their facilities. Their 3 primary facilities are on the coast, so obviously very vulnerable to sea level rise and storm surge. So we took the information and the data and the work that they had done, and we embarked upon this process for other county infrastructure, looking at ports, roads, bridges, police, fire stations. And so we met with the departments. We informed them and we asked them to do their own assessment of the criticality of their infrastructure or their facilities, and then we did this analysis to assess the vulnerability to sea level rise and storm surge. And we have an online tool that they can utilize as well to look and see that what facilities are more evidently vulnerable and some that may not be, but they still need to look at things they need to address. So what we're going to be doing is, now that we've done the vulnerability assessment, we're going to be working over the next couple years at how do we address that vulnerability and continue to increase our resilience, not only to sea level rise, but storm surge. And as we all know, the priority of a county is to make sure that it continues to provide the services and the infrastructure for their community, and so that's how we think this is extremely important to our economic resilience for Miami-Dade County. So stay tuned.
All right.
Yay.
Thank you, Nicole. So there you have it. There is a very, very fast overview of all of the work that's underway. Not even anywhere close to all of the work, but just some of the work that's underway across the 4-county region. And as John noted, cities are engaging in and expanding the broad base of work that is happening here in South Florida. So now, armed with the knowledge, knowing that we have all of this work underway, armed with the inspiration that we've heard from our other partners around the country, Jonathan's got those fancy white streets that are really cool, and Axum, we love the community energy profiles that you were showing from the Boston areas. Lots of ideas. Now, coupling that with the kind of message of inspiration that we heard from our 2 legislative representatives who represent us in the Congress, there's a strong basis for hope and for moving things along. So we are the home team. We're going to try to go ahead and cycle off so we can hear about people power, which is coming up next. And you know where to find these good folks. So if you have questions about these and other issues, please grab them at lunch and all the way. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Steve, and to my colleagues. I hope you found that to be a good kind of spattering of initiatives from the local and regional level. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and invite